Volume 16 of High School DxD was definitely a volume. Going into it, I expected a lot of interesting stuff to go on, and I was even more pleasantly surprised with some of the big revelations that happened much more later on in the volume. I would say the start was quite slow compared to the ending, just simply because the ending had a lot of big, like, bombshells going on, but at the very beginning we definitely had some world building, definitely some new characters being introduced, definitely some foreshadowing. But what I kind of liked was the new sort of atmosphere that it gave when it comes to the vampires itself. And the vampire lore follows very closely to what we know in sort of real world mythology of how vampires are treated. They're very much of an upper class society, they look down on other races, and of course they treat humans like cattle. But they are also very prestige on them as a species. They're very much of a purist kind of style, and that's generally how vampire mythology has always worked when going into other games and D&D and all that kind of stuff. As general, the lore and mythology stays very true to High School DxD, which I found very cool because it really dives into this whole idea of them being very much of an upper class and very snobbish. It's like the ultimate rich people that think they're too good even for themselves, and it really backfires on them quite ironically, because if I've got to say one thing, let's just say Volley, grandfather, wins Father of the Year, Grandfather of the Year. And that's one of the new characters that gets introduced, is Volley's grandfather. And of course we get to find out a little bit about his dad and what happened, and it wasn't pleasant. His grandfather is not a nice man. But what I found very fascinating is how a lot of people expect Issei and Volley to always be at each other's necks and trying to fight for supremacy. What I found really cool was when you find out that Volley's grandfather is the super villain and that Issei and Volley have got to work together. That I found quite funny and just really an interesting spin to it. I mean, I kind of had an idea that Volley's family definitely has some dark history to go into, but to see it unfold in the way it did is just a really cool treat, because the things that his grandfather finds out and sort of bombshells at the end of this volume is really, really interesting. And I mean, he destroys the vampires, you know, society and their sort of cities as a whole and their civilization, because they're turning them all into these black dragons, and it's just everything is going really badly. And this is partly their own fault, because they've become so obsessive about being purist, but then at the same time they're trying to use this holy grail to remove faults in themselves. I found that quite funny, where how they were going, oh yeah, we're going to remove this fault, this fault, this fault, but we're not going to remove, you know, the necessity and the need for blood. They were trying to remove all their weaknesses, which was holy magic and all the rest, but they didn't want to remove the necessity and the need for human blood, or blood in general. That I found kind of ironic, and I think that was very much deliberate, and I just kind of found it a bit of a chuckle moment, because it kind of shows just how naive vampires were with having such power at their disposal. But going back on the grandfather discovers that there's these other mythologies out there. You know, we've got Egyptians, Norse, Greeks, devils, fallen angels, vampires, werewolves, etc. You name it, all the mythologies in our world are there. But I always wondered, how could you ever expand upon that? And this is where Volley's grandfather finds out that there was a mysterious creature that wasn't part of any of the mythologies and races that are part of the world, and this discovering of a alternative world. That I found kind of an interesting bombshell, and I feel like I should have seen it coming, but I found it quite interesting because of how High School DxD has been sort of unfolding all the mythologies as a whole. There is definitely a lot more to unfold if you really wanted to dig really deep. You know, you got Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Babylons, you name it. There are so many more mythologies out there that High School DxD could dabble into. So I found it quite interesting that they sort of threw the bombshell of an alternative world where there are whole new alternative ideas and mythologies and creatures out there. That I found quite interesting, and I'm really interested to see where that goes, because I think it opens up the possibilities of a lot of new villains, and of course finding out about, of course, Great Red being the one that's sort of blockading that, and them trying to destroy Great Red and then resurrect 666. And there's definitely a lot of stuff that kind of gets exposition dumped in this volume about 666. So again, it dives more into the mythology stuff and sort of a lot of the Christian stuff that goes into sort of what's in the Bible, and also finding out about how God possibly died by, you know, stealing 666 away. So I found that quite interesting in how they tie God, 666, all the mythologies, and then this whole new world together. It's very nicely, tightly packed. And also on top of the fact, with a lot of the mythologies coming together to work together, it kind of shows that as much as there's a lot of different mythologies out there in High School DxD universe, a lot of them are working together already, so it's hard to find a really powerful villain, which is why I think Volley's grandfather and this whole new alternative world definitely adds a nice little spin to it, and adds this whole sort of power creep that's going to go on. You know, Issei, the gang, and all the rest are slowly gaining more power, and they need more power to face these new challenges. I think the one character that probably took the biggest amount of growth was Gasper. Gasper definitely had a lot of moments to shine, especially with a childhood friend that he grew up with, and the horrific events that are going on. You know, the Holy Grail has been stripped out of her, and it wasn't just one Holy Grail. I was surprised when they announced there were 2 Holy Grails in her, but then they dropped the bombshell that there were 3 Holy Grails, and I was like, whew, that's definitely a lot going on. You know, you're finding out a lot of major stuff. As I said, I expected some interesting stuff with Volume 16 because I'm very interested in the vampire lore and mythology, and seen some werewolf stuff as well. But to see just all this extra stuff that got dumped really quite threw things into a spin, and that's why I'm really excited to see where this goes. Because the one funny thing, and this is something that being an anime fan and getting into actual light novels I found quite entertaining, was I always had this weird theory that DxD was meant to do with the chest region, because the double Ds, but I kind of also found it funny that they try to tie in a different meaning into it when they make the new team called DxD, which is at the end of the volume the team that has come together that is there to defeat, of course, the greater evil and protect all the mythologies, which is sort of a ragtag team of different mythologies all working together, between fallen angels to angels, demons, etc., and even werewolves and vampires. So I found it kind of funny when Konoko's like, oh yeah, let's call it DxD, and it was kind of like a bit of a thing towards dragons and all these different mythologies. Even though a lot of us sort of see DxD as being the double D thing, I still found it as kind of a nice touch and a nice little callback to the actual name of the series as a whole. Another thing that is also quite dabbled into that I spoke previously, which was the Holy Grail. And of course the Holy Grails, because of how many there are and how it tries to sort of twist reality and break the rules of the world. And this was something that was also dabbled into in detail with the other powerful weapons and tools that these other individuals like Issei, Volley, etc. they all have them. All these powerful weapons and items and gadgets that they possess have the potential to almost break reality as a whole. I mean, Issei's has been doing that very much so, and this was something that Azazel was going into, is how the rules of the world are kind of being twisted and changed. And I find that quite fascinating because it's an interesting way to add an extreme amount of power, because once you hit sort of a certain threshold, it gets to a point where, you know, to raise the stakes even higher, you need to go very outlandish, and they've kind of preset everything up. The one thing I commend about this author is that they have thought this through very thoroughly. They've thought many volumes ahead, have gone, okay, this is the general direction, these are the rules and the structures that I want to follow with my story. Something very similar to Overlord that I really enjoy is that these authors seem to have a very good idea of what they want for the outcome to be, and they've set rules and boundaries. Some light novel writers don't do that. Sometimes they kind of just go step by step by step and just kind of wing it as they go, and that's where you get inconsistencies and plot holes. This does a very good job of that. No light novel is perfect. As I say, I call out, you know, constructive criticism, and I also praise where there is good stuff there. And that is the one thing I really like, is just how well thought all these different stages are, and just kind of setting these ultimate boundaries, you know, this alternative world of these unknown mythologies and creatures going on, adds this possibility of more powers and unknown variables. The same way as Issei is able to use Volley's power now without damaging his own life. Another power that shouldn't be allowed, because again, Issei is doubling, that's his, you know, his quirk itself as a power, while Volley's is a divide. He's able to do both now without that penalty on his life. That I find quite interesting, and I just feel like it's an interesting way of kind of breaking the rules and giving Issei more flexibility in what he can do. Because other than his scale mail and just boost, 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 and then hitting something for harder, or, you know, blowing something away, this adds some more interesting ways of him being able to combat stuff. Again, of course, stamina and him being stronger and faster and just more fit and more ready for combat is another factor that, again, he is still lacking. But a lot of these new characters as well that get introduced, that I've mainly been focusing on, of course, Gasper's new childhood friend that got introduced, Volley's grandfather, but we also do get to see more of Grafier's brother and that fight with Issei as well. There are definitely a lot of little characters that get introduced, some that don't last very long, some that do sort of set up this foreshadowing that's going on. I kind of want to talk separately about them because I think there's some really interesting backstory about them that I kind of want to dive more deeper, because this volume, as much as, you know, it's a 200-page volume, there's so much, a major amount of stuff that's being dropped when we get to really see and feel how this vampire society works, how prestige they are, how Gasper's father, and that's another character introduced, is, you know, Gasper's father, how he treats Gasper. He always refers to him as, you know, that or it. Never refers to Gasper as the name. Never says my son or Gasper. It's always using a very blank pronoun to just kind of give, you know, that general it or that. I found that quite interesting because that's basically the father's way of denouncing Gasper as a, you know, an heir or a child or just a vampire as a whole. And my golly gosh, do we get to see some interesting stuff with Gasper. Gasper's sort of new form, and then finding out there's kind of like two people in him. You know, for a boy that's basically seen as a trap, that's almost like a lolicon, he is the one boy that I find the most craziest with the story complexity. This boy has so much going on for him, and the possibilities of his story is just mind-boggling. You know, when you look at the anime and how Gasper's seen, and I mean in the light novels in the early stages as well, you don't really think there's much going on for him, you know. Yes, he's half human, half vampire, obviously has the ability to stop time, and that's kind of it, but to then see even more stuff unfold with this possibility of summoning these dark void creatures and then still being able to stop time, and wow, I find him more interesting every volume, because now we've got all these powers that he possesses, but also this sort of dual identity / personality embedded in him, and this sort of dark form that oozes from him. I just, you know, a little trap like that definitely blows me away, and that's what I really love about this volume, and I'm emphasizing that because I'm quite blown away by how well this volume tried to sort of throw things up. But sort of touching on the final components of this volume, and I think the main highlight for it is especially finding out a lot of the new stuff, but then at the end, the team that's been established to deal with this big sort of issue and pandemic that's going on, because of course Volley's grandfather is not a foe to take lightly. That is the main focus, you know, this team that's kind of been brought together, some of these new characters and characters that we've always known coming together to work as a team, and them kind of being given the green pass of all, you know, mythologies, basically saying, okay, you are allowed to basically roam and go into any territory because you are a team that is designated to fight the greatest threats that we as a team cannot fight, or as a mythologies and races that they cannot combat. So they've kind of built this ultimate A team, and that's what I kind of find really cool, because it's many different races, many different mythologies, many different backgrounds, and I'm interested to see some of the interesting chemistry with some of the new characters getting introduced and seeing some of the backstory for them, as well as seeing more of the power unfold. But overall, again, I said before, I'm very surprised by how this volume unfolded. I quite enjoyed it. The start was a bit slow, but at the end it really picks up pace and definitely throws some interesting curveballs in. So now I'm even more interested to see how volume 17 goes, which I am definitely looking forward to reading very soon. Love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What did you think of this volume? Have you read this volume? And just your overall thoughts and opinions as a whole. But if you liked this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more anime content, and I'll see you beautiful nerds in the next video.